Is this on? It's on now. Thank you, Rabba and Mitchell. As I said before, not only can he play, but he can sing too. I enjoy. I've enjoyed over the years the sport of snow skiing, and I've always been intrigued by how these styles of skiing mirror these styles of living. I used to ski with a bunch of guys every year at several of the western destinations. One friend skied smoothly and gracefully, a reflection of his smooth and gracious way of operating through life. One was cautious but good, representing his nose to the grindstone, low-risk approach to life. Another had little regard for the moguls and the steep, advanced runs. He just attacked them head-on and let the chips fall where they may. And so it was with the way he approached life, a risk-taker, never reluctant to go out on his own, taking chances where others wouldn't. Nobody has ever commented on my style because there never has been any. So it is for life in general. The way we conduct ourselves, the way we interact with others, the way we handle situations give us away, just as the accents of our voices give us away as to where we came from. When I moved from Pennsylvania to Michigan, my junior year in high school, on my first day of school, I was sitting in chemistry class. I asked a young lady sitting in front of me where the cafeteria was, to which she replied, "What did you say?" I repeated it, and she said again, "I can't quite understand what you said." Then I asked for the third time. She said, "You got an accent or something?" My accent gave me away as being someone from another part of the country. Although I have lived in Manhattan for 22 years, the longest I have lived anywhere in my life, a visitor to our congregation last Sunday asked me where I was from because she thought I had an accent. In our Old Testament lesson from Judges, read by Jan this morning, the military leader Jephthah and his Gileadites conquer a people called the Ephraimites. In the process, there became many Ephraimite fugitives. And trying to disguise themselves as friends and not foes, they were asked to take a simple test. Pronounce the word Shibboleth. But the Ephraimites could not pronounce it correctly and instead said Sibboleth. Thus, their accent gave them away as the enemy. In our New Testament lesson, Peter was easily picked out in the crowd, a victim of his Galilean accent. After Jesus had been arrested, the impetuous Peter, eager to defend his Lord, drew his sword and cut off the high priest's servant's ear. Then after all the commotion, Peter and the rest of the disciples fled the scene, leaving Jesus alone with his tormentors. But Peter hung around on the periphery, following at a distance the mob that led Jesus to the high priest Caiaphas. And while Peter watched the proceedings against Jesus, a servant girl came up to him and accused him of being with Jesus, to which the familiar story reminds us of Peter's first denial of Jesus, followed by his second denial to another servant girl, and finally his third denial when the crowd says to him, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Peter then said, "I do not know the man." Your accent gives you away. Peter's Galilean accent uncovered his association and friendship with Jesus. The Galileans at that time seemed to have a guttural sound, which sounded odd to the ears of the Judeans. Peter was easily picked out of the crowd because of the way he talked, not unlike any time when people's accents are easily distinguishable. But there were other things about the Galileans that gave them away, made them easily identified. They had a reputation, the Galileans did, for fierce independence. They rebelled against the temple priests who imposed oppressive temple taxes on them. They rebelled against Rome or any foreign invader who stripped them of their sovereignty. Author Reza Aslan writes, "It did not matter whether the invaders were Gentiles or Jews, the Galileans would not submit to foreign rule. Not even King Solomon could tame the Galileans. The region and its people fiercely resisted the heavy taxes and the forced labor that he imposed upon them to complete the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem. Galilee was a constant thorn in the side of even King Herod. Enter Jesus of Nazareth from Galilee, from the other side of the tracks. Not only the promised Messiah with a message of hope and redemption, but also a man with a clear distaste for the temple priest, a man whose only opinion of him that really mattered was God's, a man whose accent gave him away by what he said and by what he did. These facts would drive Jesus to overturn the tables in the temple, drive out the crooks and the money changers. Like any Galilean, he saw this as an affront to God in the temple. Jesus would be crucified, as we know, just days later after he created havoc in the temple, a sentence delivered by Rome and a sentence backed by the temple priest. The Galilean Jesus was so easily identified by what he said and by what he did, and therefore lost his life. The Galilean Peter was easily identified by his accent that he almost lost his life at the very moment in the courtyard when he denied Jesus. But then later, his behavior would be recognized as a follower and as an evangelist for Christ, enough that he would lose his life the same way that Jesus did on a Roman cross. Now, in a less life and death fashion, God wants yours and my behavior to be identifiable and conspicuous enough that you and I stand out in the crowd as one who says, or she says, acts the way he or she believes. He wants yours and my conduct to match our confession. He wants yours and my accent to give us away as a Christian. He or she must be a Christian by what he or she said or did. Years ago, one of my friends, who at the time was a stockbroker in Minneapolis, Minnesota, told me that a young woman working in his office next to him announced one morning that she was going to leave her job and go into the ministry. Everybody in the office, he said, looked at each other in disbelief because nobody knew that she was a Christian. Nothing she said, nothing she did, nothing she demonstrated gave her away as a person of faith. And so there is a question, which I have posed before. If you stopped being a Christian, how long before anyone would notice? That is, in your weekly and your daily living, do your actions and do your words demonstrate to others that you are a person of faith? Let me give you a recent example. Just a few weeks ago, Jennifer and I were taking a short hike in the mountains, and we ran into a couple on the trail. We stopped to talk, and just several minutes into the conversation, the gentleman, a retired attorney from Colorado and an Episcopalian, invited Jennifer and me to worship at their church. And I hadn't even told him I was a minister yet. But you see, this simple invitation, very simple, gave him away as a person of faith. his accent gave him away by inviting someone to church. When it comes right down to it, to be in a normal state is to have the accent of God. We think sometimes showing mercy and practicing forgiveness and sacrificing for others and remembering the lost and forgotten and demonstrating courage when courage is required, saying or doing all the things that go against the grain, we think all these things at times are very inconvenient and unmanageable. But truly, they are only what God intended us to be. Having been made in the image of God, imago Dei in the Latin, this is the accent you and I have been wired to speak. This is the program that has been programmed into our Constitution. This is the same accent, when forgotten or betrayed, chips away slowly at our self-worth and who we were intended to be. Tim Brown, dedicated Christian and a member of the NFL Hall of Fame, said that he used to swear all the time, while playing on the field and all the time around his teammates. He said that after one game, when he unleashed a profanity-laced tirade against an opponent, he went home. He was ashamed of himself. He went straight to his room and he prayed to God to make him a better example, a better witness on the field, a better witness in the locker room. He said that God's answer wasn't fully audible, but he could sense God clearly saying, you don't have to play the game like that to be successful. From that point forward, Tim Brown never used a curse word and became a better example on the field. In this case, what he didn't say gave him away as a Christian. The famed 20th century English writer C.S. Lewis preached a sermon one time called The Weight of Glory, which basically said that we who have been born in the image of God, as I was saying before, long to receive the glory of God. And the glory of God comes in the end of life, when you can imagine him saying to you, well done, thou good and faithful servant. That's what we hope, to come face to face with God and hear him say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. But along the way, he said, doing what God asks you to do can produce doubt and uncertainty, as it did for the prophets. But a life without doubt and uncertainty can turn out to be no life at all. A world leader once said that to be in our natural state is to be one of nagging doubt, imperfect knowledge, uncertain prediction, but to be prepared nonetheless to put on the mantle of responsibility to step out when others step back. Jesus' accent gave him away because he stepped out when others retreated. And it was the same plea that God made to the Israelites in the book of Isaiah when he said to not become like the rest, but to step out as people of God. Let your conduct give you away as people of faith. 20th century German pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I've mentioned before, we know that lost his life in a Nazi concentration camp because he tried to save the Jews, or some Jews, and tried to save his own nation. He said, Christians cannot be governed by mere principles. Principles could carry one only so far. At some point, everyone must hear from God. Everyone must know what God is calling him or her to do, apart from others. In the same vein, the late Jack Kemp former congressman and former NFL quarterback, said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So what does it mean, again, to let your accent give you away as a Christian? Former England Prime Minister Tony Blair, a Scot and an Episcopalian, tells a story about his first spiritual awakening. He's only 10 years old, and his father, at the age of 40, suffered a serious stroke. His life hung in the balance. His mother, in order to keep some kind of normality in the crisis, still sent the young Blair to school that day. His teacher was aware of what was going on for the 10-year-old boy, and she knelt and she prayed with him. But before they prayed, the young Blair confessed that his father didn't believe in God. And the teacher said, that doesn't matter right now. God still believes in him. He still loves your father. It would be a moment the young Blair would never forget. Those simple words of assurance from a teacher in a time of crisis gave her away, you see, as a Christian, as a person of faith, as a person of compassion and mercy. It is what we are called to do, to let our actions and our words, everything that we do, give us away. Oh, he must be, she must be a Christian because of the way she acts, the way he conducts himself, the way he behaves, what he says and what he doesn't say. A story I shared years ago, back in the late 60s, in a Detroit suburb, a suburb where I graduated from high school, a suburb where I had that accent. An African-American family tried to move into our community, which was an all-white Detroit suburb along Lake St. Clair. Realtors refused to show them homes. School officials were not welcoming. Neighbors conspired to keep them out of their neighborhoods. Even the administrators at middle school wouldn't give the little junior high girl a locker for her books and for her lunch. She had to keep them in the school office. Hard to imagine that going on in our country just 50 years ago. Until one day, in the midst of all the madness, a 7th grade girl walked into the school office and said to those in the office, I want her as my locker partner. You see, those simple 7 words gave this 7th grade girl away as a Christian when nobody else would do it. For you see, in the end, Christians are identified by what they say and by what they do, no matter the age, because when the chips are down, we step up while others run away.